So let's jump into your technique, and as you can see here, we brought in a whiteboard for Cliff to demonstrate his storytelling technique, his presentation technique.
And then we should probably start out with that eye of the needle. So we're
Okay.
looking at the problem, basically of limited capacity of the mind to be able to process information. So we've got to somehow get all that information we'd love to communicate. So we can do it like this. Let's say this is long-term memory, and this is sensory memory, and then working memory is this very small eye of the needle. So we want to get all this stuff that we'd love to show. We'd love to get in the long-term memory, but we've got to get it through the eye of the needle. That's the big problem that we're facing.
So short-term memory, the best way to do that is through storytelling.
Yeah, so with that, distilling, collapsing all that down to the smallest amount, and then the story piece comes in primarily, or a big part of it is about emotion.
Okay.
So the story piece, as we're looking at data and analysis and turning data into a story.
Mm-hmm.
So what we're looking at with story is to make it emotionally compelling. And what we're doing here is actually blending a couple things together. We're blending emotion with the distilled essence of the story. And that's the big key that we're looking at here, because normally when we might see a Hollywood film, that there's a little film strip.
Okay.
But we're looking at film, we're mostly talking about entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one particular way to use story structure. But our very real challenge in BCM or most business environments is we've got nonfiction information. So what we're looking at doing is bringing together storytelling with critical thinking and being able to bring those two together in a way that works. So that's what we're going to look at today.
Okay.
So your question was about the story template.
Yes.
So
What is it and how do we use it?
So the story template, it's just a Word document. We can look at it this way. And at the top of the document, it's like a very simplified version would look something like this. And then what I call Act 1, and I call this Act 2, and then Act 3 is this little piece at the end. And then we add another line right here. So what I'm referring to in Act 1 is the beginning of the presentation, the very first few moments that you have to make that emotional connection with your audience, and also to anchor the information that's going to come next. And so that piece is really, in communications terms, you just have a limited amount of information at the beginning to be able to create the context for what's going to come next. So this is where
Warming up the audience, really.
it's warming them up, making that, starting out strong,
Mm-hmm.
making it an emotional impact. When you do create some emotional connection at the beginning of the presentation, that actually activates the brain in a way that enhances the ability of people to be able to remember it. So if you have information and you can attach emotion to that information, then that's going to make that really sticky. So often, let's look at most PowerPoint presentations start out how?
Agenda.
Agenda. Okay.
This is what I'm going to tell you.
And then what comes after that?
Agenda is usually
About us, our company.
Sure.
This is what we do. This is
Mhm.
this is our team. It's like,
here's
that's
what I
gonna,
have.
instant, anesthesia for
Mhm,
your
mhm,
audience.
mhm.
So we're really talking about setting that aside. That might work well for reports and seeing the outline first of what the table of contents
Mhm.
before you're going to read a book.
Mm-hmm.
But here we're talking more about a story structure, about boom, right away making that emotional impact.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I call this story, so I mentioned a little while ago this idea that a basic story is that you're at point A, your audience is at point A, and they want to get to point B. That's a problem solution structure. They're facing a problem and they want to get somewhere, quickly. They've got some emotional stake in that. So that's the core dynamic of the beginning of the story. We can add on two little pieces at the very beginning of that are key.
So A to B is my journey. This is the
Yeah.
journey I have to go on.
It's your story arc, it's the
Okay.
journey, it's framing what's going to come next.
Okay.
So to start out, I've got something I call the setting. And that's going to be It's the very first thing that your audience experiences, and you want to have that be emotionally impactful. So, particularly in your industry, it sounds like you're preparing for certain worst case scenarios. So very often, that particular scenario can be a great way to start. So for example, showing a picture of a building on fire.
People screaming.
People screaming. A video clip of a news clip.
Riots.
A news conference where a product is, there's a problem with a product and it's all over Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and it's happening and accelerating very quickly. It's like, oh, well, that'll get any executive interested. So that's making that emotional impact. It's putting them right there in the situation. It's like, oh, wow, okay. What am I going to do? So that's a great way to start a presentation, especially in this type of industry. The second piece I call the role, or this is a key shift. I call it the role. And this is really just a brief connection that you're making with your audience to make them the main characters. So let's say that you start off with the news clip of a building on fire. Okay, so they're connected. Now the next step is to now connect that clip to them in the room and something that they're concerned about. So you're making the linkage, saying, so you see the clip of the burning building and then say something like, this could happen to you.
So this is you in this.
This is setting. You. What or the question, what would you do if this happened tomorrow morning? So you're just taking that moment now to link, the setting, what could happen, now to the my personal interest in this.
Okay. So this is really then you're working with the audience, not talking to a subject matter.
Yes.
It's personal, more impactful.
And it's so important, and I think this is something in PowerPoint presentations, we tend to make them generic. It's just the facts that I could present to anybody, or it could be read like a book. So now a key thing that's happening is I need to sit down in your chair and think, well, what would John be interested in it? And so this is putting him in this scenario, putting you in this scenario. And now it's starting to get juicy for you, but then also for me. Because now I'm saying, okay, well now if he's sitting here tomorrow morning and he's got to deal with a situation, what's he going to face? What challenge is he going to face? Which leads me to the next part of the story. So now, so notice too how this is all really focusing and making very concrete some very abstract ideas. Strategy, preparedness, continuity, all these words. Now it's become very real, especially for an executive. What am I going to do? Now we get to the key challenge they face at point A. But the problem is, we're not prepared. We haven't, at our organization, we haven't really thought about this before. Or we've got a lot of people who've done some training at some point, but we really don't know what the current status is. We don't even know if new people know what's going on. We've had big turnover. So our point A is, we don't think we're prepared.
So this could be really the situation.
Yeah.
It could be situational awareness in a way.
Yeah, that's so if I'm in this context and I care about this, then what's the, what obstacle am I going to face?
So is the setting then, is that pretty much the title of the presentation? Whatever that title is really, for example, one could be, we need to enhance the program. Or title could be, we need more money. Is that kind of the setting?
Well, we'll get to that in a second. The setting is more the building on fire.
Okay. This is the scene you're going to be in if you don't get to A to B.
Yeah, it's just something that we're trying to introduce at the very beginning that's interesting, intriguing, that'll get me leaning on my seat. I'm leaning on my seat to figure out what's going to happen next.
Okay, gotcha.
And the challenge I'm facing could be maybe we're not prepared at this organization.
Okay.
If that's the case, where do we want to be?
We want to be ready.
We want to be ready. As simple as that. How are we going to get from not ready to ready?
It's the point of this presentation.
And how we're going to do that. So we're going to make some specific recommendations. That's why we're here.
Okay.
So to get from ready to not ready to ready, we think we need to tackle 3 problems. We need to do 3 things. We need to unlock our capacity in 3 ways.
Do you always advocate for only 3? Could we have 5?
So we go back with the 3s. So with the 3s, so we're going to get into this whole 3 structure in a second. But the basic idea behind those, well, actually, if we look around even at culture for thousands of years, just like we've told stories, we've also told things in sets of 3. So it's 3-act story. There's 3s everywhere. 3 parts of government. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, in the Bill of Rights. They're just 3s that are everywhere. It's memorable, but also there's something happening in our collective psyche and consciousness, which also may be related to that limited capacity of working memory. We can remember 3. So 3 is a very, very powerful organizing tool, as well as one that can enhance your ability to help your audience remember what you're saying.
Stick to 3.
More than 3, it's going to get harder and harder for more people to remember those 3. So now they're facing the challenge, not ready. We want to be ready. Let us show you how we can get ready. So this first part of the story, this is the story part, but it's really making, and what we're talking about at the beginning is just the first few minutes of the presentation. So we're not talking about, looking at everything. We're talking about just anchoring what's going to come next.
Okay.
In an emotionally interesting terms. So how different that is, I have to say, then here's the agenda we're going to look at. We're going to look at procurement and planning, blah 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 blah.
The audit checklist.
Some of the key things that we're looking at, even that's coming out in our conversation. So I have to recommend too that the way that we're doing this is actually a very powerful way, a model for how anybody could do this, and that's this sitting down with 2 people or with a couple people, and just talking like this. And asking you questions. So it's a great technique to, let's say you're the expert, then invite somebody who doesn't know anything about what you're talking about to come in and interview you and ask you, well, what are the 3 most important things? What do you want to tell me first? So you're really using this interview technique. I go back to my journalism roots to pull that out. But one of the things that's happening cognitively, again, we've been in that left brain mode. We've got the 100 slides. We've got all this stuff down there. And we're having to shift out of that. So one of the ways to help shift out of that is to have somebody else ask a question, like what we're doing. And that works, I think if you look at any news reports, or just anything, even web videos, this whole interview technique is just something that I think that naturally, that there's our innate capacity to distill is coming out through the answering of those questions. So what we're looking at here, really, the beginning is really the beginning of the story structure. And then here, the way that we get from A to B, I would call this the story thread. Let us show you how. The title of the presentation then is basically how we get from A to B. It's this story thread is that we're in point A, we want to get to point B. And then the how or the why then becomes the distilled story. That's the backbone of the story that you can then summarize in the title at the top. That's the essence of the story. And then that becomes the foundation for your 3 major points. So this is what I call the Act 2. That was Act 1. And Act 3 is essentially your conclusion. So what we're looking at in Act 2 is to now say, okay, let us show you how we can do this. Or let us show you the 3 steps. Let us show you how. These are now the 3 you write here in this Word document. You end up writing your 3 most important points that back up what you're proposing for your story. It's basically the 3 major scenes, we could call it, of your presentation, the 3 sections. One way to look at it would be if you're to break up your 45-minute presentation into 3 buckets, what would you want to cover? Another way to look at it, we mentioned earlier, is if you want to look at it from your audience perspective, If your audience walked away and somebody asked them, what was that about? What would you like them to say when they leave? So once it goes through them, the stuff that sticks, what do you want to have stick through the other side? So in a case like this, let's say we're not ready, you want to be ready, let us show you how. What are 3 ways maybe that?
So we could have a global integrated program.
Yep, we'll put a program together.
We could institutionalize crisis and incident management into the operational decision-making process or something.
Okay, so we can integrate this into your decision-making process.
3, so we have an integrated program, a singular program, and then proper funding.
And then we can scope out what the funding would take to be able to do this.
Or we could even say, like I got a million examples, but integrate with the supply chain business partners.
Yep.
To make sure we're prepared properly.
Yeah. So all those then could be different things that are going to be put, that you'd write into each one of these 3. We're going to be working from, basically the way this tool works is you work from left to right now. It's all another way to look at it. Here, let me just show you an alternate view. Would be a pyramid. So where the story we just told, and then now we're going to back up what we said with the 3 most important points. And then what we'll do after that is we'll take each of these and we'll say, well, you say that we're going to be able to develop a plan. How are you going to do that? So first we'll gather information, then we'll model what we're doing, and then we'll test what we're doing against industry standards. So whatever those 3 are, then we break those out, each of those into 3 points, into sub-points, like here. And then those go into sub-points for each one of those. And then if we're going to go to the next level, then we then take each of those points and break those out into 3 points.
3, 3, 3.
So we're just, basically another way to look at this is just it's a hierarchy, maybe like a organization chart. And then this would have subpoints to it too.
I like this technique. When you look at layering or learning, it has to be layered appropriately. So if you have your main 3 points, then you can layer a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. I also have used this technique depending on time availability. Sometimes when we walk into an executive, we don't know if we have 45 minutes or 5 minutes.
Right.
So I have to be prepared for 45 or 5.
Yeah.
And I got to be prepared if he or she is going to, go off topic and so forth.
Yeah.
This allows me, this diagram allows me to put the protagonist, I think as you call this person, this role, as my audience, and then being able to go down a path, any path we end up going. In this type of scenario, when I'm doing a one-on-one meeting with the executives. Yeah. Or an example could be also, we've used it in a way in conferences. Yeah. If I'm not getting a lot of interest in a particular topic, I'll pick up the speed, and if I find a lot of interest, then I go all the way down to your 3rd column there. Because that's where the interest is being, the demand for the interest.
That's a great point, that the way that this works is that here you've spent the time to identify the 3 most important points. So if you've got 5 minutes, you just got 3 things you can say. If you've got 15 minutes, if you've got longer time, then you can go into a couple of sub-points. And if you've got 45 minutes, then you can go to the sub-points of each of those items. So that scalability is really important, because normally most presentations just are really this last column of detail. It's just all the facts. And so what we're doing is saying, well, we're organizing those to say, well, what do those mean? And then what's really the top level takeaway? So if you look, like I had mentioned before, if you look at any presentation and slide sorter view, you look at all of the slides, you'll rarely see where are my 3 most important points in the presentation. So this is making sure that those are prominent, those are easily accessible. And in story terms, now we've linked those to the core idea of the story. This is there in story terms, your main character is facing a problem. They're not prepared and the building's on fire. They want to be prepared for when that might happen. Hopefully it won't, but if it does, we want to be prepared. How do I do that? Here are the three most important things. And I think this diagram too is important in terms of a hierarchy, because really what we're doing is mapping how information works in an organization. So let's say you've got an organization of 10,000 people, and you've got one person, a CEO, who's in charge of the whole thing. So CEO, there's no way that that person could know what 10,000 people are doing. So they count on people who are working and their managers to know that what's most important, and their managers at VP level, fewer people knowing and counting on the folks in the organization to know what's most important. So it's kind of, what operationally is most important is kind of sifting out so that when the C-level person makes a decision, that they've got the most relevant information. So they're really counting on the people to really sift and filter out what's most important so they can make effective decisions. So we're looking at something similar here, just sifting through what's most important and getting that to the top so people can make decisions based on that.
So is this then the script template and storyboard template all in one?
Yeah, so this creates the foundation for the slides that are going to come next. So before we go there, though, there is Act 3.
Oh yeah, what happened?
So this is really,
conclusion.
In story terms, or just in classic business terms, we can call this the introduction, and this is the body, and I call Act 3 basically the conclusion. So here we might, an easy way to set this up is to go back to the beginning. So you've gone through your three main points, and you might say something like, so as you remember at the beginning, a building could go on fire at any time, and essentially we're not ready. But we can be ready if we follow the 3 steps that we looked at in this, that we looked at today. So that's just kind of, just cognitively, this is, you can also look at this saying, we're going to tell them what we're going to tell them, we're going to tell them how to get there, and then we tell them, and then we tell them what we told them. So you could also say that it's reinforcing the major point and reconnecting with the emotional connection we made at the very beginning. And just one other before we go over to the slide stuff, though, I think this whole piece of those 3 really, what I would say is really the most powerful part, or one powerful part of this is what you do with these 3. So one thing you could do, so we said, let us show you how. If you can start to apply a theme to these 3, it really starts to increase the power. So let's say,
let us to it. And
just I'd call it cognitive anchoring.
Okay.
So, for example, you might be saying, well, let us show you the 3 ways we can do this. So that could be like a checklist structure. We're going to go through 1, 2, 3.
Gotcha.
Or you could take it to the next level and say, well, we're unprepared now. We need to be prepared. But why we're not is a mystery. Let's explore why it is that we're not. And so then you could go, well, we can look at us operationally. Are there any issues there? And you can kind of go through that stuff. Could it be, because of, we don't have planning? You can explore it almost like a mystery, which makes it much more interesting.
So more investigative.
More investigative.
You use Sherlock Holmes themes.
Yeah, that's the whole mystery structure, following clues and solving a mystery is a very, very intriguing. Just look at television. Look at a series like CSI. How in all the mystery shows, that's just an enduring story structure that works really well because it's got it just makes that deep connection.
Yeah, and as an audience, I'm trying to figure it out. I'm always trying to solve the problem with you as we're going through this mystery discussion. And
the story is going to get better and better as you might start to unlock the power of a theme like that. So, there's definitely room, if you were just to say, well, there's 3 things we can do, that's great, and that's a dramatic improvement over what most presentations do, which don't even have that sort of simple structure to it.
Yeah.
That makes it that much more accessible. You can now take things to the next level by adding a more interesting theme, like let's uncover the 3 clues, or let's look for the 3 flaws, or let's find the 3 secrets to to being ready for readiness and so on. So that starts to take it to the next level.
I think I made a mistake earlier. I referred to the role as the antagonist as the protagonist.
Protagonist.
Not the antagonist. So just clarify that.
Yeah, I want to throw in too. I mean, it's probably, I know some people sometimes get kind of caught up with the technical terms, inciting incident and protagonist. So basically the setting is, emotional impact. The second piece is connecting that to your audience, being in their shoes. Then they're facing a problem at point A. They want to be at point B. How do they get from A to B? Then that's the story. So it really is, but and in business terms, it's that problem solution structure. So we're not having to go to screenwriting school and learn all the technical details to this. A lot of this is embedded in our everyday language, and even the stories themselves are like I mentioned in commercials and movies. I mean, stories are everywhere, and we can actually start to see this underlying structure in a lot of those as well.
There's a great template, and it does seem easy. But what it does is, to your point, it forces you to write the script. And when we used it, you'd be surprised how we thought it was going to be a 10-minute meeting turned out to be a 3-hour discussion. Yeah. Because the reality is we didn't have a clear, concise, concrete understanding what we wanted to say. Yeah. So what this template we found in our experience prevents us from getting into trouble. Which means if you do this correctly, you will have a clear, concise, concrete message. Yeah. Even to your point, even if you're just plain checklist type stuff, it's a world of difference from what's out there right now. And so it's simple, but yet when you really truly apply it, it really challenges you to think through your story.
Well, that's important in setting expectations, for the process itself. So I can say that, in the state of current PowerPoint is that we list all of our stuff and we read it to our audience and we get it out. And sometimes I do hear that, like, what's a quick, give me a quick tip to make that better. And certainly there are some things you could do simply, like, for example, just add 3 slides that have your 3 most important points, and that's all that's on them. If you added that to your 100-slide deck, it would make it a lot better. But if you really, wanted it to have a presentation that's going to have, big impact, then just in setting expectations, it's going to take some time, like you're describing, to be able to really think through, to get from those 300 data points to the distilled essence of the story is a critical thinking exercise. So it's not a quick fix. It's really what we do. It's what we're doing in our work, is to be clearer and more concise and be able to distill down what's most important. I would add that there is this upfront time to do that, but and tell me what your experience is. I've found with a lot of folks that once the process gets going, there might be a couple scenarios. One might be that there tend to be a finite number of presentations that we deliver. So we do spend the upfront time on these 4 approaches. And once we've got those in place, then it becomes easier to have those as a model.
I absolutely. We use this in our organization. An example for me, if somebody is going to do a presentation, I always say, well, let me see the script first. Don't show me a presentation. And if you can tell me the script and I like it, then you can show me the presentation. Yeah. To your point, critical thinking, but it is a way, as consultant, I'm in a consulting business, a way to refine the problem-solving, decision-making process. So we found that it actually serves as a problem-solving tool for us, if you can tell that story. And then, go ahead.
Well, I want to add in too, just the operational efficiencies as an organization. To do that. A couple levels, but one is you can use that analogy of movie makers. So, if you didn't have a script or wasn't quite finished and gave somebody a camera, go start filming, it would just be, from their perspective, so hugely expensive to be able to do that. So there's efficiencies in production flow and being able to get sign off on the script. We know exactly what we need, and so that makes that process more efficient. It also, focusing on the words first, rather than having the slides, actually, I don't know if you've ever dealt with these decks where you might have 100 slides and people start looking at them and editing and the whole thing becomes 200 slides. Yeah. So just to stay away from that altogether and just look at the words within a constrained form can help to editing a word or 2 is going to be a lot easier than editing 3 slides and figuring out the context.
We did find that. We find that, after, to your point, if a good story lasts a lifetime. So if you have a good story to tell, you've just got return on your investment over years. Some of these presentations we've used over 5 years. So we got huge benefit from that if you do it right. And it does, once you get into it, it does get better and better and better and faster. We also find it is the best way to transfer information. So when we're dealing with organizations, we only have 40 minutes, to your point, 90 minutes a year with the executive team. I've got to transfer as much information or knowledge as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And this is the only way that we've experienced that capability.
Well, and we may want to address too for a second, just that, for people at large organizations, this is a shift in thinking. And often, I'll give workshops at a company and some, team is really excited about it and they do a great job. And they go back, and then the boss says, "Oh, go put the bullet points back in."
Yeah, where are the bullet points?
Exactly. So
we're not here to have fun.
So it's a culture shift. Obviously at organizations, it works most efficiently if C-level, says, "This is great for our company to get people smarter, clearer, more efficient. We need to do this." Some companies have done that and said, "This is what we're doing." So it may be more of a challenge, if you're at different other levels of the organization, to do something like this. And something I normally recommend is, we're doing things the way we are. We have a before version. To take a presentation through this process and do an after version.
Actually, ahead of my list, you hot or not. I wanted
exactly, hot or not. Yeah, we can look at some later and talk about presentation, different specific examples. But that might be a way if somebody's in an organization to be able to just do a case study, basically, do the before and after, and to actually deliver it. I think that's a key point too. Whenever I give a workshop, we're actually building, learning this and actually building a presentation through the day. And at the end of the day, everybody actually stands up and delivers a presentation that they've created using this approach. And I found that when people do that and stand up and deliver it, it's just so clear, so concise, the story is memorable, and that when they have the experience of doing it and their audience does, it's, well, we're not going back to the old way. This is so much better. It's really difficult for them after doing that to go back because they've had this experience of what it could be like to be clear, to be concise, and have simple visuals to support the story.
How do organizations engage you? I mean, you have a company, and obviously you're a specialty, and I know you're doing some other bigger and better things around change management and communication. Like, I'm a big bank, or I'm a big manufacturing company, whatever it may be. Like, who hires you, and how do they integrate you?
Well, one big bank right now, it was a vice president who found the book, well, I think found the book when he was looking for a solution he was having within his division of the company. Saying that people are coming to me, giving me these presentations, and they're overwhelming, they're confusing, I don't see the story. So he was looking for a solution for that and found my book, and so has brought me in to train, do a series of workshops for all the people in his organization that give presentations. So getting 20 people at a time, we're training and learning the approach. So that's one example of just coming in and somebody who was a champion of wanting to solve the problem he was facing, brought me in to help to solve that problem. Other instances, it may be just a group, a smaller group within a company that wants to do something more interesting, or just somebody and his team. I've worked for a big management consulting company for their proposal, their new business development proposal writing team.
Yeah, definitely.
To help them be able to make their organization's proposals better.
Yes.
So it could be a range of stuff like that.
So Cliff, here's your template and technique. How do we now bring this script and the storyboard to the PowerPoint?
Well, so whenever I do a workshop, the favorite activity is now, once we're done with that Word document, we click this little button, and when you click that button,
deletes
everything that you wrote here. Actually, maybe there should be a check mark. Once you click this colored button, then everything that you wrote in this Word document now becomes the headline of a PowerPoint slide.
Oh, that's amazing.
So what you end up with, when you look at PowerPoint in the slide sorter view, is a series of slides, and essentially when you look at those slides, there's a headline in each one, and now you'd ask me about what a storyboard is, and now when you look at your PowerPoint, you can now read a story from one slide to the next. So each of these are now linked. So they're not like the traditional slide that's fragmented. It now tells a story.
Wait a minute, stop. Let me stop.
Yep.
So you're saying this is an actual macro tool?
Yeah, it's an add-in, a free add-in for Word that
amazing.
reformats all this stuff, and then you click, and then it goes into PowerPoint. And the story is there because, just like up here, we had point A, point B, 1, 2, 3. You're at point A, you'd like to get to point B, and here's how you do it by going 1, 2, 3. So just the way that this is formatted then becomes a linear sequence. And also, this pyramid we talked about, basically the second part is like a pyramid on its side. All these become slides and ordered in a certain way so they all flow into story flow. So everything goes from one to the next.
So there's your thread.
So there's the story
going
thread.
Into the long-term
Yes.
memory.
And at the beginning, tell them what you're going to tell them. We're anchoring, through the way that we've structured this with a story, and then introducing the 3 big anchor points. Then we're and having a simple visual with each of those, then just anchors the whole thing in the minds of your audience. So actually, on some of these legal trials that I think you mentioned, I do work a lot with trial attorneys. And one presentation that we gave, an opening statement, we interviewed the jurors 6 months later, and they still remembered the story and the images from the opening statement. So this can be a really powerful technique. So now we're in PowerPoint, one idea per slide. If we're to zoom in and look at one slide, let's pick a headline for that one. Let's see, we can help you.
Talking about this one?
Yeah, let's just pick a slide and do
Sure.
a quick sketch of what could be on there.
Let's talk about, I think we said this one, we first need to do an assessment of the current situation.
Okay, and so usually, as we might be massaging words that we put in there, we would, especially for a lot of audiences that we might be talking to in this industry, is linking something we can do with the benefit to them.
Okay.
So then how could we phrase that so that we could also pull out what's it going to do for them?
So step one would be we need to discover opportunities to enhance the program.
Okay, so discover opportunities. Let me just write that in here. Discover opportunities to make the program better. And what will that do? Let me take that to the next level. What's that going to do for them, if having a better program?
So we can ensure a successful, sustainable life cycle or program.
Okay, so to make that
self-serving or self-sustaining.
To make it self-sustaining. And as we would work over time really to massage those words, I think we may, as concrete as we can tie these to business outcomes. Let's say something like, we can increase your responsiveness, increase responsiveness by, how might you measure that? Like by, we can shave 2 hours off of your typical your response time that you have right now. So something like that, where we want to make it really concrete and really specific to what it is that they might be getting out of that. So as concrete as we can make it, that's actually going to make the visuals even easier to find. So let's say we went with that one along those. Let's say that we're talking about disaster response time, and let's say an organization is now taking 4 hours to get their team out on site.
Perfect. Okay.
So now we're going to say, well, we can shave 2 hours off of your current 4 hours. Okay, so now because that's really concrete, now we can just brainstorm an image that we can come up with. So let's say, let's brainstorm.
The first thing that came to mind was, 50% off.
50% off. Something that comes up for me might be something like even let's say we have a clock, And then let's say the clock, we can brainstorm different things, but one of them, like this, is at 4 o'clock. And then maybe the arrow goes back to 2. Or what might be another way? Let's say we can
finish line, something with the finish. I was thinking finish line also, because you're saying I can get to my desired end state faster.
Yep.
So maybe
it could be a finish line. And then, well, how about this too? Like, so we're talking. Let's say that we did use that image of that building, and let's say, so we've got the building, we've got a crisis happening, and let's say it was 4 hours for your crisis assessment, the photographic people, and all those people to get there. And let's say that we have a picture maybe of the team, and it could be like a stopwatch. And on the stopwatch you could say 2 hours. That could be, and that in that instance is now just visually illustrating people get there 2 hours, or it could be a digital one instead of an old-fashioned one, but conveying in a single image. Really what we're doing here in each of these slides is just looking at the headline, whatever it is, and then looking at some visual that's going to illustrate the headline. And the idea and the basic structure of these is that the audience quickly gets your point, they see it, and now they're going to pay attention to you.
Now they're listening.
So when that's the whole way that this, we're talking about, just to go full circle to the beginning, we're talking about the science behind this. By reducing the information down to what's most important through the eye of the needle, this is just a singular thought. Now we've got an illustration. It's very quick and easy for an audience to be able to get that. And now, once they get that in a couple of seconds, now they're now listening to your further explanation of that as a presenter. And this is reinforcing your point. So let's say this is up for about 40 seconds. You talk about this and you say, yes, we've done this at many companies. We've been able to reduce this time through our efficiency of training and being able to have readiness kits available at the location instead of them having to pick it up. A whole bunch of things that we can show you how we do. Then you click and go to the next slide. So during that whole time you're speaking, you're verbally talking about the detail, and this is anchoring really the core benefit and what I'm going to get out of this. I want to get this down to 2 hours. I can see that, and so it's really acting in this slide is helping to reinforce your main point that you're making. Where ordinarily it might be, the old slide, of course, the before version would be saying something like, reduction of effectiveness of blah, 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 and then we'd have all the information over here. And what you're asking your audience to do in that case is really to look at that. So this actually, quick understanding, and now it's bringing the attention to the people in the room.
I find myself too looking for the picture first, which the visual is easier to comprehend. Fire, 2 hours, people saved, and then you got the words behind it.
So it's mutually reinforcing. And then either way they might look at it, it's a quick read, a quick understanding of it, and then so importantly, then they're paying attention to you and making it much more interesting. So this is an example of the less is more. By having a simple structure and design, you're cognitively helping them to just get the little piece, the most important piece, to frame it, and then you're providing the rest of the information, and then you click, and then you go on to the next slide in the sequence.
What slide? Is it 1 minute per slide?
Yeah, maybe 40 seconds.
40 seconds.
Yeah, depending on how fast you might go. And that's a whole big shift, I'd have to say too. Like where, what we're doing produces, slides. I would call it more like a film strip, where when you see a movie, you don't say, well, how many frames were there in that movie? How many tens of thousands of frames? What you remember is the story, what was carried forward in terms of the content. So, I can understand, the conventional way of doing slides like this, definitely want to know how many slides, like are there going to be really 100 slides like this?
Yeah.
That's too many. But here we're really shifting, that's more of the pages of a book model. Here we're looking into film strips. There might be more that look like this, but they have less density. So it really opens up space for more.
I like this analogy of film because at the end of the day, if I'm presenting, I really am an actor. And so if I'm able to put that script in the notes here and master that script just like I am on Broadway, then I can really work the crowd or, be engulfed in that environment or be, I don't know what the right word is, influential.
Well, that's so important. I mean, that we started out talking about the whole theme of, I'm talking to the information and looking at the screen. We've really cut off this rich communication. Communication happens between people, and there's actually a physiology to the way that we're actually making eye contact, and we're in the presence of one another, and we break that when we're looking up at the screen. So definitely, you're here to actually be present with the other person, and this is helping you to do that. And I just want to throw in that when you do use this approach, I know there's definitely a concern, well, what about all the detail? So that can be carried, and this is described in more detail in the book, but basically, when you look at this slide in the context of the notes page, there's the on-screen area, which you see right here, which you present, which is really simple. And then there's an off-screen text box down here. You can also put graphics down here, but this is where you then write out, let's say you're going to give this verbally, you can write out what you say. And you're giving all those examples and details here. And you can actually print this out and provide it as a PDF or give a handout to provide that context. So what happens here is that you've used PowerPoint by using this notes page view. You are creating a presentation that both works cognitively according to the research by having one idea per slide, threading that eye of the needle. And then also when you provide the handout or a PDF, it's the full context for the entire thing for people who weren't there. So they're able to have that complete information as well without being overwhelmed. Normally what happens is we're trying to shove everything in here.
Nobody knows about the notes section.
Yeah, so here we've solved that by breaking it out, putting what's on screen in person in a very distilled form that gets the main point across. And then for people who are not able to be there and want the fuller context, then we've got that taken care of too.
So Cliff, if you had to summarize your book into 3 key points, what would they be?
Well, start strong with that story structure. Then the second one is distill your most important ideas into only 3 most important points. And thirdly, create a simple visual slide that enhances that story.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you for sharing your information and techniques with the business continuity industry, and I look forward to hopefully having you aboard maybe later this summer and we could demonstrate some of your techniques.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Cliff.